I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're taking a look at a terrific book. It is called Authoritarianism and Propaganda, The Puppet Master Tools by J. Marcelo Baqueroalvarez, also known as Beezee. This intriguing book employs a complex writing style and rich symbolism that challenge and engage the reader on deep political themes. His work invites us to decode the subtle mechanisms of control and influence that shape societies. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Good River Print and Media for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his important book. The links are below this interview. Beezee, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Logan, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and for the opportunity to be speaking to you and your wonderful audience.
Well, the honor is all mine. Glad to have you on the show. I know our viewers are interested in what you have to say. Let's start out first by giving the folks at home an overview of what authoritarianism and propaganda is all about.
Oh, yes. So my book, this is my debut book, and Authoritarianism Propaganda, The Puppet Master Tools is a non-fiction, thought-provoking analysis of how authoritarians have been taking propaganda as a way to galvanize their power through history. And this is startling because history is repeating itself even right now as we're speaking. So this book teaches you how to defeat propagandists by pairing the critical thinking with intellectual honesty. In other words, the book juxtaposes that geopolitical environment of how authoritarians have risen to power. And we also cite examples that go from the Bolshevik Revolution that led to the creation of the Soviet Union to like about the 90s when Pinochet was in the final days.
What are some of the examples of authoritarian regimes that are portrayed in your book and the propaganda that they use to kind of control and influence the populace?
I cited several examples, and mostly I wanted to go, as I say, from the Bolshevik Revolution kind of to the 90s, because the reason is that authoritarians, they have a tendency not to be very kind to criticism. So one of the reasons why I chose these authoritarians in particular that are historical, some of the usual suspects that you might expect, like Mussolini, Hitler, Saddam Hussein, even Idi Amin, Pinochet, among others, it's because it is not too far in human memory, but it is close enough for us to really understand what is actually going on today, how the political climate was rising to power, because it's not a left or right situation. It is a human situation, how they actually galvanize. So those are the examples that I have chosen.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Saddam Hussein. Obviously, he ruled his country with an iron fist. He also utilized propaganda. What type of propaganda tools did he use?
So he used several types of propaganda. So one of the things that it was very interesting about Saddam Hussein is that much like in many of the authoritarians, he was actually a populist. He actually did some good things for people, but then he also was doing some really terrible things. One of the things that I actually speak about the book is the moment that he had some of his acolytes and even some of the people that they were in his party, but they were no longer convenient. He actually read a list of several names, and people essentially went into this chamber. They arrested and executed several of them. So that is kind of like the type of propaganda that we're talking about that exists, because it actually galvanizes people, that visceral response that moves that rhetoric into action. So it might be subtle, it might actually be hijacking those good values of people, and then it brings them into doing atrocities, making them believe that they actually have the moral ground. So that is kind of like what the book speak about, and particularly for Saddam Hussein, that's one of the areas that I focused on.
I think that's probably what brings a lot of dictators and authoritarian leaders into power is that part of their message rings true. Part of what they do is good, whether it's feeding people or educating people. So they kind of get the masses under control that way. But that's when they start ruling with an iron fist. And then also they target certain individuals and groups that they feel are enemies. And they hit them so hard that everybody else is happy to see them getting the beating and not us, right?
There is a lot of truth in that. Yeah. one of the things that an authoritarian is going to be doing is going to create that division, is that us against them. Only we can defeat those adversaries, whoever
Right.
we deem to be the adversaries. And it's actually even more insidious than that, because, as I say, the authoritarian doesn't really necessarily care about what is your political leaning. They care about if you have a bias, either you're going to play with us, I'm sorry, either you're going to be playing with us or you're going to be playing against us.
Right.
And that is the most important thing. Are you with us? Or are you against us? And if there's that visceral response that makes you feel that you are going to be morally superior to the other person, even if what you're doing, it could be genocidal, illegal, or otherwise get you otherwise in trouble, that is going to be hijacked because the person is going to be feeling, well, I'm doing something that is bigger than myself,
Mm.
doing something that is more encompassing. I am doing something that is the right thing in history, even if I might be seen unsavory. So that is going to be a hallmark from propagandists. They are going to be hijacking that human emotion, and that's why I keep emphasizing that point, because it works.
Exactly. They make you feel like you're doing something for the greater good. Like
Absolutely.
this might be evil, this might be bad, this might be vicious, but it's for the greater good
Mhm.
because this person's an enemy of the state and so forth. And they're looking to deprive you of your wealth, deprive you of your education or your opportunity, right?
That is a lot of that. Yeah, it happens. And it even actually goes a step forward, more not so much about depriving you of who you think that you are, but actually transforming
Mm,
that way of thinking. Something that perhaps you were against, maybe discriminating against a certain group of people or start dehumanizing them, but it gets normalized.
mm,
And then all of a sudden it starts becoming, okay, everybody else is doing it. It is acceptable. It is morally superior. So then it becomes less reprehensible to them. But then little by little, people start changing the way that they're thinking, and that also happens with the younger generations. They
mm.
start hijacking those minds when they're still malleable, when they still have any insecurities, if they have any type of biases. It's very easy to start just like finding a little bias and then just wiggle your way around and start transforming them into a different side of thinking. I'll give you a very quick example. For example, when you look at television from just even 20 years ago, look at how the culture was, let's say in the 90s, to what it is now. What
Mm.
you could actually say in a joke on some of the hit TV shows, but today it wouldn't be the same way. But it was acceptable back in those days. That is a little bit of how that works, but on steroids. It is about the human mind.
Right. And some of the things that are depicted on television today, whether it's sexual, whether it's violence, whether it's a whole number of issues, wouldn't be accepted back in the 90s. I mean, I
No,
don't, you know what I mean? I
yeah.
don't think a TV show, that's graphically violent or very, very sexual would have made it in the 90s as well. We've been conditioned to feel like, okay, we can have this violence, we can have this sex, we can have this nudity, right? So it's all step-by-step training, right?
Absolutely. Well, and you can see, like, let's say, from the 90s, you just go down a little bit down to the 80s, and what there was maybe, speaking, like some of that gratuitous nudity,
Right.
some of the actors, it was just going to happen for some part, even if it didn't have anything else to do with the plot.
Right.
But as things start, changing, maybe the 90s was not so much on the nose, but then in certain networks, depending on certain audiences, some of those depictions are going to be changing. But again, what I'm saying, it is important to be hijacking that human mind. What
Mm.
is acceptable for them, what it gets normalized, for how long you can actually make it normalized, and are people actually maybe perhaps even going to have certain nostalgia to actually be confusing about what was that past and
Yeah.
start to putting it into a new packaging. And that's what I was saying, that history is repeating itself. Things are happening again, but we don't actually then get to really stop and think how the cycle is actually moving. Like, for example, the news cycle. If you heard a story 3 days ago, it could
Mm.
have been very important, but there's something that is more important now that is
Right.
trending. And that news cycle that perhaps was a very important indicator, now it's buried in page 27 or page 300 of Google or whatever other
Right.
story that otherwise would have taken more prominence, but it was not important enough at that point for people to actually think about it, and it just continues pushing on to what's the next thing, and then people tend to forget something
Exactly.
that's important.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree that there's a lot of manipulation by the media, in particular, in deciding what's important, what's new, what's valuable, and that's all dictated by what the first stories you see in your Facebook feed, your Instagram feed, your Google News, or whatever it is, and that can be very manipulative as well. What country were you born in, raised in, and tell us a little bit about that experience?
Absolutely. So I was born in the Republic of Ecuador, so right
Mhm.
in the middle of the world, in the city of
Yeah,
Quito. So if you would be at sea level, look out to the sky, like about almost 2 miles above sea level, that's where the city of Quito is. So uh,
gotcha.
in Ecuador, even today, I'm not going to be talking necessarily about the political climate today, but it was a very convoluted place. They had a lot of demagogues, and the political system is very complex. As a matter of fact, is unlike the binary system that you see in the US, that either you mostly lean to the right or to the left.
Mhm.
Over there, the ballots are just these gigantic. They look like bed sheets that they have all these different political parties, and you get to see that the political spectrum is so fluid because even on the right and left construct, it's a little bit flawed because a lot of the other I don't want to say necessarily nuances, but all the different flavors that actually pepper the thinking of how a person should be governing. They're not as obvious when you put them in a binary purpose, but when you get to
Mhm.
see it over here, then you get to see some people have all these communist tendencies, but they also are very fascistic on the other side, which are on the total extremes of the political spectrum when it comes to authoritarianism, but then you actually get to see some people actually subscribing to some of those principles without actually really realizing. So that was a little bit of my growing up through Ecuador. There would be politicians saying all kinds of things that I would never dare to repeat, but they were raising the us against them mentality,
Mhm.
particularly between the populace.
Yeah.
Recently, there was a president in the country where I was born, but that's several years after I came to the States in 1995. I was 16 around the time. But even before that, we had, for example, a president who actually got he got kidnapped by terrorists, by domestic terrorists, and he was
Amazing.
a right-wing president that got hijacked by left-wing terrorists, and then the next president was a left-wing president, and he liberated, or essentially he get all these guys out of the prison, and then all of a sudden they're speaking in TV on TV with suits and ties after the previous years there were all these commercials and all these PSAs, public service announcements that they were showing them about the killings and the bombing and all kinds of other crimes that they were doing. So this is an example of actually how to see how it has actually been moving. That also prompted me to really understand a lot more about how the geopolitical situation is going on in the world.
Mm.
As far as my actual job, before I was in the US Navy, I'm retiring very soon. That's why I'm changing the look. And I was an analyst. So as an analyst, I get to see a lot of information, and we're talking about insane amounts,
Mhm.
and try to package the information that is true from the fiction and from all the misdirection for somebody to make a decision that is going to be ultimately creating some level of policy. So that's what I wanted to bring with the book in a way,
Mhm.
because obviously, far from saying something that would be classified, all this is open source, is actually historical, but bringing the history in a way that actually shows those indicators.
Mm.
Bringing, that's why I'm talking about the critical thinking has to come with intellectual honesty, because that was the Achilles heels in these regimes. They
Mm.
have people who have critical thinking but they don't have intellectual honesty. What does that mean? That means that they actually have a way to see the world in the way that I see it. You
Right.
are wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. But then when it comes full circle, say, oh, that applies to me. No, I cannot be wrong. Mom, dad, and Uncle Timmy, my pastor, and all my friends and family, they cannot be wrong either.
Right.
And it creates this cognitive dissonance. And then little by little, everybody else becomes dehumanized. they have to be wrong. I cannot be wrong. That is how my political climate essentially started growing up, and what I've seen through the last several decades. And it's startling because now it's exacerbating because, as you were mentioning, in the media cycle, the way that how communication is moving, the half truths they are permeating. So I'm trying to bring that intellectual honesty with the critical thinking, so people don't continue being bamboozled and we continue repeating
Yeah.
those terrible points in history.
The divisions are huge when it comes to manipulating people, whether you're a demagogue or an authoritarian leader or a dictator. Rich versus poor,
Mhm.
those with land and those who don't have land, business owners and workers, white, black. That's how they grab power, right?
That is a very easy way to do it. Not always, depends on the geography and depends on the demographics, because
Mhm.
in some societies there might be a little bit more homogeneous,
Sure.
so like everybody
In
looks a
which
little
case it
bit
might be
different.
religion or the North and the South or East and the West. And there's always a difference, even if
Yes,
everybody's the same, there's a difference
absolutely.
between people that the demagogues jump on, right?
Absolutely. For us, like for example, like in the Western culture, since there's a lot more diversity, it is very easy, yeah, of course, to put it very on the nose because, okay, you look different than I do, you worship different than I do, you have a different accent than I do. Even
Mhm.
if you're in the States, like from Southern accents to
Sure.
like a New England accent, there's going to be some changes as
Yeah.
far as that. So then it creates that division. In some other places, it's actually very interesting because it is actually utilizing the propaganda from a different place as a success story, even
Mhm.
though they're actually suffering. And I'm going to give you a quick example, which I actually speak on the
Sure.
book. In the Soviet Union, for example, in the Soviet republics, they had all this exuberant propaganda that they would be showing people very rich or living very rich lives in one of the provinces, and the grain is falling, and they're like having all these people dancing and smiling and whatnot, but they would not be showing that to their province. They would be showing that to a different province, like
Right.
far away. So let's say if you were in Georgia, they would be showing, something from Uzbekistan,
Right.
they would be showing something from maybe from Moscow. They would be showing somewhere like that would be like in the Vladivostok, like in opposite sides of the country. So you don't necessarily get a chance to see what was going on to you, but the message was, hey, look how hard they're working, look how well they're doing because they believe into these whatever construct that they're doing, and they're a success story. You could be the success story. Now the funny thing is that they didn't actually let them travel from one republic to another, so you couldn't actually necessarily validate that information, how that
Exactly.
happened. And those are, for example, how we actually get to see those haves or the have-nots, even if they might actually be homogeneous, because they kind of look a little bit the same in the way. But then it's still there's these haves and there's have-nots. At the same time, actually, for the Western world, like the propaganda, they would be saying, well, in America or in the West, people are really poor and they don't have anything to live on, or they have the debt or they have all that, and there is some truth. You were absolutely right.
Mhm.
There has to be enough truth, just enough, essentially kind of like that clickbait.
Right.
Paying attention to that, it might actually be something to that. And then it falls into what we call the echo chamber. You fall into the bias. You have the confirmation bias. Okay, everybody seems to be thinking about the same thing. It must be true.
Yeah.
And then they just push a little bit more of that information just to continue validating. And then if people are so enamored about that, it is very hard to break them out. Much like when a person has a bad relationship and everybody tells them, hey, that person is not good for you.
Yeah.
And but like, don't talk bad about my significant other, they're
Right.
my world, and they cannot be bad, until eventually they realize that what everybody else was telling them was true,
Yep.
and they can no longer reconcile the thing, this situation. That is something similar that happens with propaganda, but until that happens, the damage can be exponential.
Exactly. Exactly. Modicum of truth, a lot of lies that go with it. One of the things that despots, authoritarian leaders, and dictators do is prosecute their political enemies. They come up with charges, either criminal or civil, and put them on trial and make them look like a criminal. Do you agree?
That is very true. And that is actually one of the things, that we actually have to see. However, we also have to be careful to actually really understand the accountability with prosecution,
Hmm.
because those are two things that they have a tendency to actually be intermixed as far as that. We are all supposed to be accountable under whatever common laws that we have agreed upon in a society. Okay, how are those going to be changing? They're going to be changing. Okay, what was legal even in the US several years ago today would be reprehensible, and the same thing would be said for many laws around the world, particularly when it comes to discrimination or with treating people in certain social classes with a velvet glove and everybody else with a whip. So
Right.
those things have more, hopefully, and it takes somebody to change that. But one of the big red flags that we actually get to see in authoritarians is if they are going to say like, hey, I need to be able to get away with whatever is it that it happens, even if it is for a little bit of time. Okay,
Mhm.
just for a little bit of time, give me all that power, I'll be good for that, and then I'm
Right.
going to move on and to do that. I actually speak in my book about one of such examples. So the guy that was in charge of the Republic of the Congo, and he changed the name to Zaire. So this guy, he was actually kind of like a journalist, like an army journalist for a little while, and then he was able to change the constitution for one time and say like, hey, yeah, I need to have this power just to me, just to make sure that everything's good. And they gave him that. And then he gave the power back.
Right.
So then again, to the second time to do that, he actually, of course, abused the power, because now the people that would be his opposition, they start suffering accidents. Surprise,
Exactly.
surprise. So those are kind of like the things that still happen to this day right now in countries around, not even too far away from where we're sitting. It
Or maybe exactly where we're sitting. I mean, think of what
sometimes
happened during COVID. We were told we couldn't go out, we couldn't work, we had to take vaccines. I mean, so these emergency, all-powerful rules were put into place so our leaders could tell us exactly what to do, and we had no say, don't you think?
it can happen. I mean, there were some different requirements, particularly for when it comes to COVID. Now, how it was actually handled, and I'll agree with this thing, it was not handled properly. Okay,
Right. Yeah.
it was mishandled in many ways. One of the things, without actually going too much into details,
Sure.
uh, when I was in the U.S. Navy, we actually had a watch floor that was what we call the khakis, so like senior officers and senior enlisted, that which we dress in khaki. That's what we call khakis. We have to see the metrics of how COVID was actually affecting our forces, which it
Mhm.
was.
Yeah.
Which, we actually get to see, like these trends. We actually have to create these things that went to the admirals, and we had like meetings every day to make sure that our forces were not going to be compromised, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Because they were, it's like, it's not if a person dies necessarily that is going to disrupt your thing. If you have, let's say, a watch floor of 5 people, okay,
Mhm.
and all of a sudden 3 of your people are sick, what
Right.
is going to happen to the 2 people who actually have to be there? Are they going
Yeah.
to have to work 24 hours a day? Are they going to be having to be showing up all the moment of the day, and now they have no breaks until the other people finally get to recover? What if they get sick also, and now you lose this capability? So it becomes a very pragmatic thing as far as what happens. What we found as far as COVID, and that I'll agree, is that it it shows definitely how an authoritarian dystopia might actually occurred,
Mhm.
but it also show one other big vulnerability: the human altruism.
Mhm.
That is the biggest vulnerability that the authoritarians actually were able to get from that, and they were able to exploit. And that's another reason why it actually expanded for such a long time and created a lot more havoc than not just killing people, but the actual human emotions. So what do I mean by that? So, like or dislike the mask, as far as that, like nobody liked them. I
Mhm.
hate wearing the mask as far as that. But the understanding it was that the mask was not preventing you from inhaling COVID. You could still
Right.
inhale COVID. It was for you not to spit COVID. Much like a surgeon wears a mask so they don't spit inside the patient. Same thing.
Right.
So the altruism, the little altruism was, okay, I'm wearing this thing for the little bit of time that I'm around people. So finally, I cannot be taken out of somebody else out of circulation, or maybe they're going to get sick, even if they don't die, but just as I told you, like in the watch floor, if I have five of my sailors, and I need five, and now three of them are gone, what is going to happen to my watch floor? I still have to be doing all the job that I have to be doing, but I have to be doing with fewer people for 2 weeks or however long, it's going to be taking them for
Right.
them to recover. So that was one part. The other portion that it's even more insidious is then the panic.
Mhm.
Is the portion. Can people be really sometimes trusted to do the right thing if you give them the opportunity to do the right thing? So why did this actually created? Some people actually forgot. Do you remember that we couldn't buy hand sanitizer or
Yeah.
toilet tissue anywhere, even though it didn't have anything to do with COVID when it started?
Right.
That is actually part of the propagandistic point of view to see about the disruption of people.
Mm.
So that actually created, okay, we gave you guys a chance to do kind of like the right thing, but that is not obviously not working because like the curve keep going up.
Right.
So they had to actually come with something that it was going to stop it for some point. And funny thing actually worked. I'm going to give you just one quick anecdotal thing. In the
Mhm.
ship where I was serving on, the last before that is the USS Gold, the same ship that was attacked by violent extremists in Yemen in 2000. That's the very
Mhm.
same ship. That was my last ship. Obviously, several years after that attack. When we were in deployment, we didn't have one, but two COVID outbreaks on board the ship.
Mm.
But now we're talking about a destroyer. You're
Mm.
underway. You're doing what we were doing. This is after the invasion occurred in the Ukraine. So
Mhm.
we were not defending Ukraine. We were doing stability on the region, essentially preventing the conflict from spilling out. That's the mission of the U.S. Okay, we cannot actually even say that we are helping the Ukraine because that comes into Article 5 of the NATO Convention. So it's a whole different animal as far as that. But now we actually have this small crew, but relatively speaking, just like 300 or so, that you have in a destroyer, and it went from one case when we hit Spain to 60, like this.
Wow.
So what does that mean? That means the ship still has to be moving 24 hours a day.
Right.
Still have to be now changing berthings for people to actually have like places where to be. We still have, to do something. And it was very interesting because in the work centers of the people who thought that it was not a big deal, it went up in those work centers. So it's a microcosm. We can actually see it. In the
Right.
work centers that they were actually following the guidelines, it went down, and they were actually holding the entire ship together to make sure that we didn't essentially collapse. We were not
So it shows if you
our
follow the
station.
rules, sometimes
Exactly.
you are doing the right thing.
So what were the rules? This is very interesting. Put on a mask. Funny thing, put on a mask. Social distance as much as we could. We were at work. We were at work, and even when we were at the meal hours, we were to be quiet,
Mm.
so we didn't talk. Okay, put on a mask, put over there, put that stuff. What happened? It went down.
Wow.
We controlled COVID. Within 2 weeks, it went over there. We hit the port again, and this is the entire crew was already vaccinated, but this was the new the new Omicron at the time variant. So there was another kind of like variant by the time that we went over there, like another month or so, and it actually went up there, and we had a second outbreak. But this time, since we actually have those lessons learned, it went instead of going like this, like it went the last time, it just went up a little bit, and then we stopped it,
Yeah.
and then we maintain our military forces mission ready by following those guidelines, washing the hands, putting the mask so we don't spit on other people. And people were mad at some point, it's like, well, I cannot talk, like, well, you were in the mess hall, it's like, and say, okay, I'm going to be eating,
Uh,
eat, put the mask, and then
right.
leave, but it worked.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I'm going back, to that altruism portion, because it had to be forced still, even in a military environment. We had to force some sailors because the ones that they didn't believe it, they infected the other shipmates, and it was affecting our watch rotations.
Amazing. I mean, that's a great microcosm, a great study of COVID, a great study of altruism, and a great study of what can be done if you do follow the rules. Very, very interesting indeed. The name of this book, it's a fascinating book. As you can tell, we've been speaking to a fascinating author today. The name of the book is Authoritarianism and Propaganda, The Puppet Master's Tools by Beezee, also known as J. Marcelo Baqueroalvarez. It's an intriguing book which employs a unique, complex writing style that is rich with symbolism, and it challenges and engages the reader on deep political themes. It's an amazing book. It'll have you think about our government here in the United States of America, what's right, what's wrong. It'll help you with your own critical thinking skills for sure. Beezee, thank you for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you so much, Logan, for having me. It was an honor. Thank you so much.
The honor was all mine. I enjoyed talking to you. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.